Hello, for this video I'm at Sunderland Cemetery, as it says, in Sunderland, also known as Grangetown Cemetery. The sun has just come out before I started this video. First of all, I'm just going to show you a headstone. Now the person on it had an interesting life, and he died in 1934. Normally don't do any headstone stories past the early 30s unless it's something to do with the World War II. But this gentleman's story starts way back in the 1850s. I'll just show you the headstone. Now, judging by where he was born and all of the surnames around this area, I think this is one of the old Catholic sections of Sunderland Cemetery. So, loving memory of Thomas, the beloved husband of Catherine Dillon, died August the 5th, 1934, aged 80 years. And obviously with a surname like Dillon, that gives a clue to where he was born. He was actually born around 1854 in Ballina, County Mayo in Ireland. Now, he joined the Kings Dragoon Guards, which was like a cavalry regiment in the British Army. And in 1879, they went out to South Africa as part of the Anglo-Zulu War. You might remember the film Zulu and also Zulu Dawn, about two events which happened on the 22nd of January 1879. Now, on the 22nd of January 1879, the British force was wiped out by a massive Zulu army of over 20,000 men at Hendon. It was the same day Rorke's Drift. Now, on that battle, like 600-700 British regulars were left for dead. Well, they were all dead on the battlefield. The Zulus ritually disemboweled them, and on the night time, Lord Chelmsford's force came back to camp, had a look around, stayed for the night, then went off to relieve Rorke's Drift the morning after. So the bodies were left as they were. Now, Thomas was part of those Kings Dragoon Guards. They weren't involved in any major battles. They were used for escorting and scouting across the Zulu countryside. And a couple of months later, they were sent to Isandlwana to actually bury the bodies and tidy the battlefield up. So Thomas himself was involved in, he went to the scene of one of the British Army's biggest defeat by a native force in the whole of the 1800s. Now, the story for Thomas doesn't stop there, because on the 31st of May that year, he was tasked with a party of King's Dragoon Guards to guard Louis Napoleon, who was the Prince Imperial of France. His father had been the Emperor and had been deposed, and they came to England as guests of like Queen Victoria, and the young Prince Imperial joined the British Army. Now, he begged to go and serve, but obviously didn't want any harm to come to him. But Queen Victoria allowed him to go, so he went out to Zululand, and on the 31st of May, a company, I think it was a couple of companies of guards of the King's Dragoons, escorted him out into the Zulu countryside. They were doing like a little surveying bits and pieces of the area and so on. Now, the following day, the Prince Imperial left with 6 of the the natal volunteers, or the native contingent, went out on their own. Unfortunately, they got ambushed by a group of Zulus. Every prince was left, and he fought brave, but he was taken down and he received 18 stab wounds to his body. Now, this was one of the biggest stories of that particular year. They'd already had the disaster at Isandlwana, and now the Prince Imperial was dead. On that night, when it was announced that he was missing, Thomas was part of the patrol which went out to try and find him, and he was there when they recovered his body, and it was escorted back to the camp. There is a painting you can find online of the actual patrol sort of ready to take his body back to camp, so you can give an idea of the type of uniform he was wearing and so on. So pretty much two of the major events of the Zulu War Thomas was at the scene of, well, one after the battle and one for the death of the Prince Napoleon. So after that he came back to England, and in 1884 he married a Catherine Shea, I think in the Bradford area. In the 1880s they moved to Sunderland. They lived in Emma Street, Norman Street, and eventually settling at number 40 The Parade. They did have quite a few children. I know 3 died in infancy, and for decades, for the rest of his working life when it came to Sunderland, Thomas worked for the Sunderland Gas Company, which I believe was down the Hendon area. And the parade itself still exists. There's no houses on it now, it's more like business units down close to the seafront down on Hendon. So you can just imagine him indoors, like cold winter days, working at the gas company, thinking back to those days when he was riding his horse over Zululand in the heat in hostile country in one of the most famous wars of the 1800s. So there he is, Thomas Dillon, an Irishman, fought in the British Army and ended his days in Hendon. His wife, by coincidence, died at the age of 80 years as well, but 10 years after Thomas had passed away. So just gives an example. There's lots of people like Thomas, men who fought in lots of those old Victorian conflicts throughout the 1800s, buried in the cemeteries of Sunderland. Naval officers from Trafalgar, Royal Marines, people who fought in Afghanistan, Crimea, out in Egypt, Sudan, and after the war, after the battles and so on, a lot of them came back home or moved to Sunderland and went into different occupations. It was just like Thomas, working in the gas company. So I would love to have a sit down and talk with Thomas about his time in the Anglo-Zulu War, because it's one of my favourite wars of that particular era. So just to give you some location of where he's buried, that's the main road going through Sunderland Cemetery to the top end where Asda is. So that's it, Thomas Dillon. So thank you very much for watching. If you do like it, please give it a like and click on the subscribe button. Thank you very much.